CNN just got caught publishing fake news again. When will it ever end? It appears CNN should have spent more time over the past 48 hours fact-checking actual news stories and less time blackmailing private citizens. A statement from the Vice President Mike Pence's office had discredited CNN's article claiming that 44 states and D.C. have refused to give certain voter information to Trump Commission. The article, which has yet to be corrected, cites CNN's own inquiry to all 50 states as the source of its claim. CNN's claim was also repeated on air via a giant chevron. 44 states refused to give certain voter info to Trump Commission. New Day, CNN. Let's take a listen here.
Kentucky nor enough wine in California to make this request sensible. We have secretaries across the nation. Indeed, no state is fully complying with the request, and I'm proud that Kentucky and California are leading the way.
That's Kentucky's Secretary of State saying there's not enough bourbon in Kentucky for her to go with this request made by President Trump's Election Integrity Commission. This morning, 44 states are refusing to hand over certain voter information to the panel. The commission asked for information including the names of voters, their dates of birth, party affiliation, and the last 4 digits of their social security numbers. Joining us now, Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft. He is one of 3 secretaries who plan to comply with the request. Why comply, sir? And thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. First and foremost, there's a lot of confusion about what has actually been asked for. If you read the actual request twice, they stipulate that they only want this public information that the states have. In Missouri, that's going to include things like name and where you vote and in which elections you have voted. It won't include how you voted. It won't include your social security number. It's just public information that we regularly give out to any individual that asks for it.
They are asking for those last 4 social security digits, are they not?
Actually, no, sir, they're not. If you read the letter, what they say is they want public information that the states have about voters.
So you're not going to turn over the social security numbers in full?
No, sir, they didn't ask for it. In the letter, they asked for the public information that may include, and then they list several factors, because different states have different bits of information which they make publicly available. And I, as other states, we are just going to release that publicly available information that is routinely released to candidates, to news organizations, and anyone that actually makes that request. That's what the law says, and we'll follow the law.
All right, so you're going to follow the law. You're not going to give any information that the law does not allow for. And then you get to the policy concerns of why take part in this at all when it seems to be a search for an answer to the president's claim that there were 3 million illegal votes, which you know and I know is a baseless claim.
Well, first of all, it seems to me that this is an investigation as to whether or not vote fraud occurs and how prevalent it is. And we in the state of Missouri regularly see instances of pretty much every conceivable type of vote fraud you can imagine, from documented cases of voter impersonation to people trying to slip multiple ballots into the ballot box, to voting multiple times, people voting where they're not registered. We actually have a state legislator that was elected. It was proven. Right. 2 members of his family pled guilty in a court of law to illegally putting him over the top. He won by 1 vote, and now he serves in the legislature. So we know that vote fraud occurs.
Right. You want the integrity of the system to be as good as possible. This is usually controlled by the states. There's very little that the federal government could do. And as you know, when you've gone around the state making the case for your efforts, you really only have 1 case that you can cite. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to do better. But it does mean that you shouldn't blow the problem out of proportion. And the president said there were 3 million illegal votes. There's absolutely 0 proof of that. And why waste time and money with a commission to look at fraud when you don't have a major fraud issue?
Well, first of all, we have far more than just 1 instance. I'd be happy
you had 1 case. When you get pushed, you fall back on 1 case.
No, sir, we haven't. I mean, we've had multiple cases just in the 6 months that I've been the Secretary of State here. And I'd be happy to go through those with you. If you'd like to come to Missouri, we can show you instances that we've had of it. It is unfortunately an occurrence. I mean,
but I'm talking about voter impersonation. What we're worried about with illegal votes is what? It's somebody saying that they're able to vote, impersonating somebody else, and then voting. You have one case of that, true or false?
Actually, I think that we should be worried about any illegal votes. You know,
no, we should, but in terms of
officials
the 3
believe
million
that a good election is where they win and their opponent loses. That's not true. A good election is where the voters of the state or the voters of the nation make the decision.
Right.
And that's all I want.
Right,
I want to make sure that the voters make the decision and that they know that their vote counts.
But if that's all you want, is to make sure that you have the most full participation in the fairest election, you wouldn't be doing this. You would be doing all you can to encourage all the eligible voters you have who don't vote to vote. But you're not doing that. If you were to care about voter ID, you would do it at a time outside an election cycle. Because when you do ID during an election cycle, as we both know, we've seen it go all the way to the Supreme Court now with the North Carolina case, it has a chilling effect. You keep people home. You have people who don't have ID. So if you really care, why don't you try to get the eligible voters to come out and participate? Why don't you do voter ID outside the election cycle so it doesn't have a chilling effect? You're not doing those things. Why?
Well, actually, we're implementing voter ID right now before we get back in cycle for a U.S. Senate race and a statewide state auditor race next year. And we've done it in such a way that we can tell you that if you're a registered voter in the state of Missouri, under our voter ID law, you will be allowed to vote. In fact, the former Boone County clerk, who was one of the lead plaintiffs in throwing out our photo ID law 10 years ago, has now come to our side and has stood up and said, this is a good law. It's implemented correctly. It protects against fraud. It makes it harder to cheat, but it makes sure that every registered voter can vote. And that's what we should all want. We should all want to know that if you're a registered voter, you can vote, and that your vote will count. And as we've been going around the state making sure that people are informed about that, we've also been trying to sign up more people to be a part of the process. The more people we have from whatever background, whatever belief system, as long as we're all trying to find what's best for our state and our country, the more voices we have, the better off we're going to be.
So why do you think so many secretaries of state are refusing to do what you're doing, including Republicans? Let me put up a statement for you to respond to.
Sure.
They can go jump in the Gulf of Mexico, and Mississippi is a great state to launch from. Mississippi residents should celebrate Independence Day and our state's right to protect the privacy of our citizens by conducting our own electoral processes. There you got the Secretary of State, a Republican there. They don't want to do this because they say this is our business. States do this, and we're not going to participate in this ruse of searching for a problem where there is none.
Well, first of all, we do know vote fraud occurs.
But it happens on a very small scale. There must be a list of priorities for you to take on as Secretary of State that has much more impact on your state than voter fraud.
Well, I think I'm responsible to do a lot of things at once as Secretary of State. I think that people appointed me or elected me to do that, and I'm going to do that. But I also think that any time elections are changed based on voter fraud, that's a problem. And we've had that occur in Missouri. It's been demonstrated. But secondly, I think we can both agree that whether or not there is vote fraud, what amount it occurs in, has been something where there are smart, good people on both sides of the disagreement. And I think that...
No, I don't accept that as a premise. This is not a 50-50 proposition where maybe it's 3 million, maybe it isn't. There are no numbers anywhere like that coming from anywhere that deserves respect except the president's mouth. He owned this as an explanation for the popular vote results, and other than that, we know the studies. You know them. They've been cited to you many times. You can't substantiate the allegation with anything other than the president's own words.
Actually, I can substantiate the allegations and the actual occurrence of vote fraud in Missouri. And the funny thing is that in the studies you cite, none of them include these vote fraud occurrences that happen in the state of Missouri, which right there points to a problem. But I think
it's your strongest reckoning, Secretary of State. You have a handful of cases. You can't make this a problem of any specific dimension or scope. You don't have the cases. You don't have the proof. I'm not saying you don't have any cases. I'm not saying you don't have a problem. We all know every state has problems. There's almost zero chance that our votes are accurate. But it's not a widespread problem. It's not something that you're dealing with on a major scale. Isn't that just the truth?
Well, I'm glad that you agreed that yes, we do have vote fraud and that none of the vote totals are completely accurate. I think that's an improvement. But what I would say is, if like you believe that vote fraud isn't a massive thing, it doesn't change elections, shouldn't you want there to be an investigation by a bipartisan commission like this with full information? Because if the data shows that, you can stand up and say, I was right. And I would think that Republicans would like to have a bipartisan investigation with all the information. Why don't we do this well and put this to rest? Either we have a problem with it or we don't. Let's find out. If we have a problem, let's work to solve it. If we don't, let's move on to other problems.
It's just so ripe for being misleading. And obviously the goal would be 100% accuracy, right? That's what I'm talking about. That's what you would be talking about as the ultimate goal. We're not there yet. But look, let's just deal with it as a problem on its face. How many cases have you seen brought to a point of conviction that deal with voter fraud in your state?
Well, see right there, one of the problems we have is getting convictions.
Yeah, I know, because you don't have good cases. Yeah, that's what they've seen in this study. You only have a handful of convictions,
sir,
because once you go all the way through the process, they fall away.
Actually, they don't. I mean, the most recent case I would cite that goes directly against what you're saying is we had an individual that tried to vote 2 ballots. They put 2 ballots into the voting box. They signed an affidavit that admitted they had done it, but then they got to the witness stand and said, you know, I have these prior problems, I have these difficulties in life, and the jurors said, you know, we don't want to convict this person. They did it, we know they did it, we can prove it. And then when you talk about in-person vote fraud, or voter impersonation, if you will, we have the evidence. We have the signed poll book that doesn't match. We have
right,
the
but
signed
it's just a number of cases. Obviously, you want to aspire to be better. Look, when the president made an issue and the White House then came out and said, or his campaign team at the time, and said, you know, a lot of people are registered in 2 different places. He had staffers who were registered in 2 different places. You know, this is, the concern is that, are you just chasing after something to validate a myth, or you're actually going to make the system better? We will see when the results of this commission come out, depending on the rates of participation. And Mr. Secretary of State, you are welcome back anytime to validate the efforts. Appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
They should not even, you know what they should do? People should not even go on to CNN, because you can see how they twist the story. According to the Washington Examiner, the White House statement written by Vice Chair of the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, Chris Kobach, however, reads, while there are news reports that 44 states have refused to provide voter information to the commission, these reports are patently false, more fake news. But they should refuse, because you can see how they're like still pushing their agenda continuously. You know, I guess that's what they're paying them for, the Soros-backed news network. That's what they're paying for. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching.